The work ethic that I put in, sometimes you think it go unnoticed, but I had supervisors that cared. I had HRs that cared, plant managers. You had these people that cared, that saw the work. If you told me I would be in this spot a year ago, I would have thought you was crazy. This journey has just been remarkable. My name is Dorianta Beauford, and I am an associate site buyer. As a purchaser, a site buyer, we basically have a hand in mostly everything that involves, raw materials, production, shipping. Probably a year of being a level 1, I became a dispatcher. Within 2 years, I became the team lead, and did that for probably about 2 or 3 years. Got promoted to senior team lead, and then this role became available. And around that time, I had just came off of maternity leave. I had my daughter. I was home, and I was watching her, and something was just like, you know what, go back to school. If you plan on staying with the company for more than 4 years, we got a TAP program, the tuition assistance program. So I called my wife, I'm like, hey, I'm going back to school. She's like, what? I'm like, yeah, sign me up, let's go do everything. We did all the paperwork. There's, so much on the line. Children, the job, I wanna do something just for them, just to say, hey, I did it, you can do it. My son was born actually the day I left for the military. I stayed and did my time, so I missed out. And I came back, certainty to always have, a special place in my heart and my family heart, because I had more time off than my wife, to take care of the baby, But I had time that I never had before to spend with my children. You come into a business or organization that's like people-driven, right? That gives you the opportunity that you're looking for if you do the right stuff. If you do the right thing, if you come with the right mindset, right? The opportunities is endless.